Chairman. The ACP is helping more than 18 million households afford a broadband connection. Whether that's for the first time or after getting laid off, the ACP is working. Madam Chair, can you briefly describe the relationship between the ACP and broadband deployments through the BEAD program?
Thank you for the question. I think that relationship is really important. After all, Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure law with both of these programs. They work hand in hand. The BEAD program supports deployment, and the Affordable Connectivity Program supports subscribership. These two programs need to go together. That's how we make sure that we solve the digital divide in this country.
Thank you. Commissioner Starks, briefly, could you describe the geographic footprint of the ACP and its effect on both rural and urban communities?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I think both of these programs, we see that there are a significant number of ACP enrollees in BEAD spaces, and in fact, BEAD and the build-out commitments that folks are going to have to make, providers are going to have to make, they have to offer an affordable option as well. And so I also agree that the footprint that's going to be expanded through BEAD is also going to be very important as it has a synergy with ACP.
Okay. Thank you. As an original co-sponsor of the Rip and Replace bill, I believe we must be unwavering in our commitment to get every single piece of vulnerable Chinese gear out of our networks. Madam Chair, could you describe the consequences if Congress fails to address the $13 billion shortfall in Rip and Replace funding by July 17th?
Thank you. Like my colleague, Commissioner Carr said, we need to get this equipment out of our nation's networks, and the small carriers that have it are going to face a tough choice. They're either going to file with us and request support to remove it, but only get paid about 40 cents on the dollar, or they will leave this equipment in their networks. That's a really unacceptable choice, and I think that we need to work with Congress to make sure we fully fund this program and get this insecure equipment out of our nation's networks.
Thank you. I'm sure to many I sound like a broken record, but I believe it's a national security and economic imperative for the U.S. government to speak with one voice on spectrum governance. Madam Chair, in the run-up to the WRC, do you believe a protracted lapse in auction authority has implications for our standing in the international community?
Yes, absolutely. We need to go to the World Radio Conference this year with full spectrum authority. We need to lead at that conference and lead the world on these matters.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Symington, I want to thank you for your work highlighting the role of receivers in promoting more effective use of our limited spectrum. I also appreciate your support for my Spectrum Coexistence Act, which will require the federal government to take a close look at its existing receiver technology. Commissioner Symington, briefly, what is the role of receivers in promoting more efficient spectrum use, and do you think it's valuable for the government to scrutinize its own technology?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and greatly appreciate, Ranking Member Matsui, and greatly appreciate your comments. So the role of receivers in spectrum is, is that there's a two-way transmission path. You transmit and you receive, and therefore the quality of receivers has a great bearing on what can be transmitted and what can be transmitted adjacently. Therefore, in planning spectrum, everyone takes anticipated receiver quality and performance into account implicitly. The danger is, and the reason that the FCC has been reluctant to touch this issue before, is that the federal government could impose overly rigid standards, or perhaps deviate from the harmful interference standard that's long established as not only our law, but also as the international approach, in favor of an engineering standard that would then become precedential and inappropriate and would serve as a straitjacket to lock us into a particular developmental pathway.
Okay, thank you. Today, I want to talk about robocalls. Today, Chairman Lujan and I introduced the FCC Legal Enforcement Act to give the FCC new authority to go after scammers. Consumers across the country are inundated with these calls, and I believe it's imperative we help enforcers keep up with these fly-by-night operations. Chair Rosenwartzer, can you talk about the limitations of the existing process and how this bill will help the FCC crack down on scammers?
Thank you for your efforts. We have been working to try to get rid of these junk calls and texts on overtime. In fact, like I mentioned, we have 44 state attorneys general now working with us on that. We've issued more than $700 million in fines. but the FCC is not institutionally allowed to go collect those fines in court. I'd like to have the power to do so. I recognize that some of these folks are fly-by-night companies, but I want to be able to hold them accountable in a court of law, so I appreciate your legislative efforts.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope we can get rid of those robocalls, and I yield back.